This is Blake Thornhill, and Russian naval power in the Black Sea is collapsing in real time. For the first time since World War II, Russian merchant vessels are abandoning open water routes and hugging the Turkish coastline out of fear. Not fear of NATO warships, fear of Ukrainian drones. According to maritime tracking data analyzed by multiple defense analysts in early January 2025, Russian tankers are now traveling routes that add hundreds of miles to each journey, clinging to Turkish territorial waters where they believe they're protected. This isn't a minor tactical adjustment. This is a fundamental admission that Russia has lost control of what Moscow once considered its own sea. And the implications stretch far beyond shipping routes. They reach into the Kremlin's war budget, Putin's relationship with Turkey, and Ukraine's negotiating position for any future peace talks. Let me show you exactly what's happening on the water. Maritime tracking systems like marine traffic and commercial satellite data have documented a dramatic shift in Russian vessel behavior over the past 3 months. Take the SIG tanker, which is currently under both U.S. and EU sanctions. According to shipping data reviewed by Reuters in late December 2024, this vessel departed the Russian port of Novorossiysk, and instead of taking the direct route across the Black Sea toward the Bosphorus Strait, it immediately turned northeast toward Sochi. From there, it followed the Georgian coastline, then the Turkish coastline, before finally approaching the Bosphorus. This route is approximately 40% longer than the traditional direct passage. And this isn't an isolated case. The Wall Street Journal reported on January 15, 2025, that analysts tracking Russian maritime traffic have observed this pattern becoming standard operating procedure for vessels carrying Russian oil. Ships are systematically avoiding the central Black Sea, treating it as a no-go zone. Why? Because Ukrainian sea drones have turned those open waters into what naval analysts are calling a contested maritime environment. That's military speak for, if you go there, you might get blown up. The most revealing aspect of this route change is what it tells us about Russian naval capabilities. Russia still has warships in the Black Sea. It still has coastal defense systems. It still has aircraft that could theoretically provide air cover for merchant vessels. But none of that is stopping Russian captains from choosing the longest, most expensive route possible just to stay close to someone else's territorial waters. That's not the behavior of a dominant naval power. That's the behavior of a navy that's lost control of its own operational area. Now let's talk about what drove this dramatic shift. Ukraine has been developing and deploying naval drones since early in the war, but the campaign intensified significantly in late 2024. According to the Ukrainian Security Service, or SBU, which released a statement on December 18, 2024, Ukrainian maritime drones successfully struck multiple Russian vessels in November and December. The SBU specifically mentioned attacks on tankers named SIG and Shchors in late November 2024, while these vessels were transiting the open Black Sea. CNN reported on December 22, 2024, that while neither tanker was completely sunk in these attacks, both sustained hull damage severe enough to require emergency repairs and were unable to continue their intended missions. The SIG was towed back to port, and satellite imagery later showed it in dry dock at Novorossiysk. But the attacks didn't stop there. On December 11, 2024, the tanker Derbent was struck in the Black Sea, according to Ukrainian officials quoted by the Associated Press. Then, in what may be the most strategically significant attack, Ukrainian forces claimed responsibility for hitting the tanker Mercer off the coast of Senegal in West Africa. Yes, you heard that right. Senegal, which is approximately 4,000 miles from Ukraine. The SBU made an unusually public statement about these operations. According to their December 18th release, these attacks were specifically designed to target Russia's ability to finance the war through oil exports. The message was clear: if you're transporting Russian oil, you're considered a legitimate military target contributing to Russia's war economy. Now, I want to be clear about the legal and ethical dimensions here. Under international law, targeting civilian merchant vessels is generally prohibited unless those vessels are directly contributing to military operations. Ukraine's argument is that oil revenues fund Russia's military, making these vessels part of the war effort. Russia obviously calls this terrorism. This is contested legal territory, and reasonable people disagree about where the line is. What's not contested is the operational impact. According to maritime insurance analysts quoted by Bloomberg on January 10, 2025, insurance premiums for ships carrying Russian oil in the Black Sea have increased by an estimated 200–300% since these attacks began. Even Russia's state-backed insurance companies are reportedly struggling to provide coverage at rates that make commercial sense. This brings us to the geopolitical paradox at the heart of this story. Russia is now dependent on Turkey, a NATO member, for the safe passage of its merchant fleet. Let me give you some context on Turkey's unique position here. Turkey controls the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, which are the only passage from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Under the 1936 Montreux Convention, Turkey has specific rights and responsibilities regarding naval passage through these straits. During wartime, Turkey can restrict passage of warships, which it has done to both Russian and NATO vessels since the war began. But the Montreux Convention also gives Turkey sovereignty over the straits and the surrounding waters. That means Turkish territorial waters in the Black Sea are, by definition, Turkish sovereign territory. Ships transiting those waters are under Turkish jurisdiction. According to a report by the Turkish news agency Anadolu on January 8, 2025, Turkish authorities have observed the increase in Russian vessels staying close to the Turkish coast. While Turkey hasn't made an official statement about this pattern, the implication is clear. Russian captains believe that Ukrainian drones won't attack ships in Turkish territorial waters because that could be considered a violation of Turkish sovereignty. Now, here's where this gets really interesting from a strategic standpoint. Turkey and Russia have a complicated relationship. Turkey is a NATO member, but it has maintained economic and diplomatic ties with Russia even during the war. Turkey has never recognized Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has repeatedly stated that Crimea belongs to Ukraine, and Turkey has been vocal about the rights of Crimean Tatars, a Turkic ethnic group that has faced persecution under Russian occupation. At the same time, Turkey has been one of the few countries maintaining dialogue with both Moscow and Kyiv. Turkey mediated the grain deal in 2022 that allowed Ukrainian wheat to reach global markets, and Turkey has facilitated prisoner exchanges between Russia and Ukraine. So we have this fascinating situation where Russia is essentially seeking protection from a NATO member that has never recognized Russia's territorial claims in Ukraine, and that provided Ukraine with Bayraktar TB2 drones that were crucial in the early months of the war. According to defense analysts quoted by Defense News on January 12, 2025, those Turkish-made Bayraktar drones were instrumental in destroying Russian armored columns in the first weeks of the invasion. Now, Russian ships are hiding in the territorial waters of the country that built those drones. The irony is almost too perfect. But Turkey isn't just significant because of what it's doing. It's significant because of what other Black Sea countries are not doing. Let's look at Romania. Romania shares a Black Sea coast and has been one of the most vocal NATO members in condemning Russian aggression. According to Reuters reporting from December 2024, Romania has recorded multiple incidents of Russian drone debris falling on its territory during Russian attacks on Ukrainian ports near the Romanian border. The Romanian government has called these violations of its airspace and territory unacceptable. Romania's defense ministry announced in November 2024 that it was increasing military cooperation with the United States, including expanded use of the Mihail Kogălnicianu Air Base for NATO operations. Romania has also been hosting NATO Black Sea patrols. For Russian ships, Romanian waters are absolutely off limits. There's no shelter there. Then there's Bulgaria. Bulgaria has its own complicated history with Russia, but according to reporting by Bulgarian media outlet Capital on January 5, 2025, the Bulgarian government has taken a firm stance against Russian military activities in the Black Sea since the 2022 invasion. Bulgaria has reported multiple incidents of Russian interference with maritime navigation systems, which Bulgarian officials have described as hybrid warfare tactics. Bulgaria has worked with Turkey and Romania on the Black Sea Mine Countermeasures Task Group, a naval cooperation initiative aimed at dealing with mines that have drifted into the Black Sea since the war began. According to a NATO statement from October 2024, this task group has cleared multiple mines, some of which originated from Russian defensive minefields near Crimea. Bulgaria has also significantly reduced its dependence on Russian natural gas. According to the Bulgarian Energy Ministry's January 2025 report, Bulgaria now receives most of its gas through the pipeline from Azerbaijan and through LNG terminals, cutting Russian gas imports by over 80% compared to pre-war levels. So when you look at the map of the Black Sea, Russian ships have exactly one coastline where they feel remotely safe: Turkey's. Romania is hostile. Bulgaria is closed off. Georgia has limited coastline and complicated politics. Ukraine is obviously out of the question. That leaves Turkey. That's it. This geographic reality gives Turkey enormous leverage. And here's where we get into the realm of strategic speculation, but speculation that's grounded in how these relationships have worked historically. Several analysts have suggested that Russia may need to offer Turkey significant concessions in exchange for the continued safe passage of its merchant fleet along the Turkish coast. One possibility discussed by energy analysts at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies in a January 2025 brief is that Russia could offer Turkey discounted natural gas through the Turkstream pipeline, which carries Russian gas directly to Turkey under the Black Sea. Currently, Turkey pays market rates for Russian gas. A 20-30% discount would significantly reduce Turkey's energy costs, which is politically important for President Erdogan, especially given Turkey's economic challenges. From Russia's perspective, selling gas at a discount to Turkey would be painful, but not as painful as having its oil export revenues completely choked off by the inability to safely move tankers through the Black Sea. This would be a classic example of Russia trading long-term economic strength for short-term survival. Another potential bargaining chip is the Black Sea grain corridor. In July 2023, Russia withdrew from the grain deal that allowed Ukrainian agricultural exports to pass safely through the Black Sea. That withdrawal caused global wheat prices to spike and damage Russia's relationships with several African and Middle Eastern countries that depend on Ukrainian grain. According to a report by the International Crisis Group from December 2024, there have been quiet discussions about potentially reviving some form of grain corridor arrangement. If Russia were to offer concessions on Ukrainian grain exports in exchange for the safety of its own tankers, that would be a significant diplomatic win for Turkey, which has positioned itself as a mediator and a major reversal for Russia. Now, I want to be clear, these are scenarios that analysts are discussing. I haven't seen confirmed reporting that these specific negotiations are happening right now, but the logic is sound. Russia needs something from Turkey. Turkey is in a position to ask for something in return. That's how international relations works. The challenge for Turkey is that this is a delicate balancing act. Ukraine and its Western allies are watching very closely. If Turkey is seen as actively protecting Russian commercial shipping, that could create tension within NATO. Turkey has to walk a fine line between exercising its sovereign rights over its own territorial waters and being perceived as helping Russia evade the consequences of its invasion. Let's talk about what this situation is costing Russia economically, because that's ultimately what makes this strategically significant. Russia's oil exports are the primary revenue source funding its war effort. According to the International Energy Agency's December 2024 report, Russia was exporting approximately 7.5 million barrels of oil per day before the intensification of the Ukrainian drone campaign. Those exports generate tens of billions of dollars annually, even with Western price caps in place. But transporting that oil has become significantly more expensive and risky. The longer routes Russian tankers are now forced to take add fuel costs and time. According to shipping industry analysts quoted by Lloyd's List on January 14, 2025, the extended routes around the Black Sea perimeter add approximately 8-12 hours to each voyage, which translates to additional fuel costs of $15,000, $25,000 per trip, depending on the vessel. Then there's the insurance issue. Bloomberg reported on January 10, 2025, that international maritime insurance companies have largely withdrawn from covering Russian oil shipments in the Black Sea. Russia has tried to fill this gap with state-backed insurance, but buyers of Russian oil are aware of the increased risk. When Chinese and Indian refineries, Russia's primary customers, see that the ships carrying their oil might get attacked by drones, they use that as leverage to demand lower prices. The Russian government hasn't released official figures on the economic impact, but analysts at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace estimated in a January 2025 report that the combination of longer routes, higher insurance costs, and lower sale prices could be reducing Russia's oil export revenues by 15-20% compared to what they would be under normal Black Sea operating conditions. For context, Russia's federal budget for 2024 projected oil and gas revenues of approximately $180 billion. A 15-20% reduction in oil revenues would mean $27-36 billion less for the Russian government. That's money that would otherwise go to military equipment, soldier salaries, and weapons production. Ukraine has also targeted Russian port infrastructure directly. According to Ukrainian military statements reported by the Kyiv Independent on December 28, 2024, Ukrainian drones have struck oil storage facilities at Novorossiysk and the Tuapse refinery multiple times. These attacks don't just damage infrastructure, they create delays in loading ships, which backs up the entire export system. Now let's flip the perspective and look at what Ukraine has achieved here, because this is genuinely remarkable from a military strategy standpoint. Ukraine doesn't have a traditional navy. Russia destroyed or captured most of Ukraine's naval vessels in the first months of the war. The flagship of Ukraine's navy was scuttled to prevent Russian capture. Ukraine lost its primary naval base when Russia occupied Crimea in 2014. And yet, through the development of relatively inexpensive naval drones, Ukraine has effectively driven the Russian Black Sea Fleet from the western Black Sea and now threatens Russian commercial shipping across the entire sea. According to the Royal United Services Institute, a British defense think tank, in a report published January 7, 2025, Ukraine has demonstrated a new model of asymmetric naval warfare. Traditional naval power requires destroyers, frigates, submarines, extremely expensive platforms that take years to build. Ukraine has achieved strategic effects with unmanned platforms that cost a fraction of what traditional naval vessels cost. This has multiple benefits for Ukraine. First, it directly damages Russia's war economy by threatening oil exports. Second, it demonstrates to Western allies that the weapons and intelligence they're providing to Ukraine are being used effectively, which helps maintain political support for continued aid. Third, it creates leverage for potential future negotiations. Think about how the negotiating dynamics change if Ukraine can credibly threaten to shut down Russian oil exports through the Black Sea. In any ceasefire or peace negotiation, Ukraine could potentially offer to stop targeting Russian commercial shipping in exchange for Russian concessions on territory or other issues. The situation in Crimea is particularly important here. Russia has justified its occupation of Crimea partially on the basis that it's strategically vital for Russian naval power in the Black Sea. But if Russia can't actually operate safely in the Black Sea, that justification becomes much weaker. According to military analysts quoted by the Times of London on January 11, 2025, Crimea has become more of a liability than an asset for Russia. It's difficult to supply, it's under constant threat from Ukrainian missiles and drones, and it no longer provides the strategic advantage that Russia thought it would. Former U.S. General Ben Hodges, who commanded U.S. Army forces in Europe, told CNN in late December 2024 that he believes Crimea is operationally isolated from Russia, and that Ukraine has effectively neutralized it as a military base, even though Russian forces still physically occupy the peninsula. Now let me give you my analysis of what this all means and where this could be heading. First, we're witnessing a fundamental shift in how naval power works. For centuries, controlling the seas meant having the biggest navy with the most powerful ships. Ukraine has demonstrated that in the age of drones and precision-guided weapons, you can contest control of the sea without having a traditional navy at all. This has implications far beyond the Black Sea. Militaries around the world are watching this and rethinking their naval strategies. Second, this situation reveals something important about Russia's current strategic position. Russia is a country that claims to be fighting an existential war against NATO expansion, yet its merchant ships are seeking shelter in the territorial waters of a NATO member. That's not strength. That's weakness, disguised as pragmatism. Putin can sell that domestically with propaganda, but internationally, it's a clear signal that Russia is not in the dominant position it claims to be. Third, Turkey is emerging as the real power broker in the Black Sea, and by extension, in this entire conflict. Turkey isn't the most powerful military in the region. It's not the richest economy, but it controls the geography that matters, and it's maintained relationships with all the relevant parties. That's smart strategy by Erdogan. Whether you agree with his politics or not, he's positioned Turkey to have influence far beyond what Turkey's raw power would suggest. Fourth, the economic pressure on Russia is real, and it's cumulative. We talk a lot about sanctions, but this is different. This isn't Western governments passing laws. This is Ukraine directly threatening Russia's ability to generate revenue. That's more immediate and harder for Russia to work around. You can find ways to evade sanctions. It's much harder to evade a drone that's actively hunting your ships. Looking ahead, I think we're going to see Russia become increasingly dependent on Turkey, which means Erdogan will have more leverage in this conflict. We might see Turkey extract significant economic concessions from Russia. We might also see Turkey use that leverage to push for diplomatic solutions, because a negotiated end to the war would reduce the risks Turkey faces from having Russian ships clustering in its waters. For Ukraine, the question is how long they can sustain this level of pressure. Drones are cheaper than ships, but they still cost money. They require ongoing intelligence support from Western allies. If Western support weakens, Ukraine's ability to maintain this campaign could decline. That's why Ukraine is working so hard to demonstrate to Western audiences that they're using aid effectively. So let me recap the key points here. 1. Russian merchant vessels have abandoned direct routes across the Black Sea and are now hugging the Turkish coastline out of fear of Ukrainian drone attacks. 2. This route change adds significant costs and reveals Russia's loss of control over what it once considered its own sea. 3. Turkey has emerged as the key power broker because it controls both the strategic geography and maintains relationships with all parties. 4. Ukraine has demonstrated a new model of asymmetric naval warfare that's forcing major militaries worldwide to rethink how naval power works in the drone age. And 5. The economic pressure on Russia from these attacks is real and cumulative, potentially reducing oil export revenues by billions of dollars. What's your take on this? Do you think Russia will offer Turkey major concessions to maintain access to these routes? Will Ukraine's drone campaign force Russia to change its strategy in the war? I want to hear your perspective in the comments below. For more detailed analysis and additional coverage of this story as it develops, head over to my blog at blakethornhill.blogspot.com. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button for daily news coverage you can actually trust. This is Blake Thornhill bringing you the truth. Stay informed.